Session of Ask the Farmer Q&A. I am Bridget Barry and I coordinate Farming for Nature. Farming for Nature was set up to encourage and inspire farmers that farm or wish to farm more for nature. One of the ways we do this is each year we find exemplary farmers that are doing great things for nature on their land. And these are our Farming for Nature ambassadors, and this Q&A is a great way to hear from these ambassadors. So tonight, over the next hour, I'll kickstart the session by asking our speaker a couple of questions, and then if any of you have any questions, feel free to write them into your chat box and we'll facilitate them as the session goes on. Just to say, if you miss any of the session or you know someone who would like to attend and misses it, the recording of it will be up on our YouTube channel, Farming for Nature YouTube channel, within the next 24 hours. So feel free to, and I will send everyone that registered for the event the link. So feel free to share that with anyone that you think might be interested in the event. So on to tonight's session. I am delighted to welcome Andrew Chilton. Andrew is one of our more recent ambassadors that joined the group. He was awarded his plaque at the Farming for Nature Winterage weekend down in County Clare. Andrew, along with his family, run 2 farms in County Roscommon with dexters, goats, sheep, chickens, and even alpacas. I'm going to have to say, Andrew, I think you're probably, of all the people I've interviewed, you probably have the widest range of animals, and look forward to hearing more about that. So welcome, Andrew. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Bridget. It's great to be here.
Andrew, so like I say, you run a farm with a wide range of animals, including, I didn't mention bees as well as the other things. So,
yeah,
but you might just describe your farm and your farming system for us.
Okay, so we run 2 farms. They're run as 2 separate enterprises. The alpaca farm is one separate enterprise, and on that we have we average about 50 alpacas a year because we're a breeding station, recognized internationally, selling breeding animals around the world. And that farm bounds onto Lough Key, so we're on an NHA, a high nature area. And we also have a large apiary there. We have 14 beehives at the moment overwintering. And then the home farm where we live is a much smaller organic holding up on the mountains above Lough Key. And there we run a mixed farming operation. So we have a small herd of Dexter breeding cows. We run sheep. We have 2 goats at the moment. I'm not sure I want to keep them. They've done a lot of damage to some of my trees. So that's the pro and the con of keeping them. They did a great job looking after some of the boundary management. They love to eat the briars and the brambles and the stuff that actually is a problem. So we kind of rotated them around the boundaries to keep our boundaries in order, which was excellent. We don't have pigs at the moment. Last summer they got into Angela's garden, and anyway, I'm still paying the price for that.
They're now pork chops. Okay, got it.
Yes, and then we have 2 orchards that were established first under reps and then under glass. So there's now 25 trees in those 2 orchards, and under that I run some chickens.
Okay.
It fluctuates between 30 and 50 depending on how Mr. Fox is doing. And
okay, so before we get into all of that, because there's quite a lot there, I just want to kind of find out more about your own journey into farming and how you arrived onto this farms, sorry. Okay,
farms, yeah. So I grew up in South Africa, and in 1999, chasing the euro, or the punt at the time, I moved to Europe. When I was growing up, I always wanted to be a farmer. My parents both come from, I wouldn't say farming background, but my mum was in boarding school with a lot of farmers, so I spent a lot of time on mixed farms, sugarcane estates, extensive maize, tillage farms, and dairy and beef farms. So a lot of experience to farming, and that was kind of my dream. But as a conservative South African culture, when I went to university, my dad said, "You're not doing agriculture, you're doing business," and so I did. And then I came to Europe looking for new adventures, and living in Dublin, in Torquay, we had chickens in the back garden and bees and espalier and fruit trees. And one day my wife had a big row with a neighbor about the rooster. And then I came home and she had a big row with me about the rooster.
Okay.
And I was like, "Arr," and she said, "Well, we don't live on a farm." And kind of 6 months later, we'd sold up in Torquay and moved to the west of Ireland.
And your neighbors were very happy, I would say, at 4 in the morning.
We're still friends.
Yeah, okay, good.
They do occasionally come to visit.
Yeah.
So yes, they are, but it got ridiculous. You know, there's no sound legislation around keeping chickens, but I was catching the rooster in the evenings and putting him in a box and putting him in the scullery. You know, but when nature calls, doesn't matter how dark it is, he decides that it's time to crow.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Anyway, and so that brought us to Clara, which is the home farm. And when we were living in Dublin, we'd already started farming organically, just in the garden. You know, we were registered as an organic holding. And then we were farming down here with a complete mixed holding. I was doing organic pigs, organic sausages, and we moved all the bees, so everything basically moved up here. I know we bumped into our neighbors when we were moving up, and we had 2 beehives on the back seat of the car. And Lawrence was aghast. He was going like, "What's in the back?" I said, "Oh, those are bees." And I go like, "How many are there?" "There's probably 150,000 in the 2 hives." It's like, "You're crazy."
Happy days.
Anyway, needs must. It was an experience. And then the alpaca holding came later. In 2012, we were very fortunate to get opportunity to expand. And so
before we go into the alpaca holding, because that's kind of sounds like a thing in itself, and sounds like you've made farming a business, so it wasn't a total waste going to university. So, but you might just take me through. I mean, you've got a real mixed stock farm there. You know, do they all kind of run in rhythm with each other, or do you kind of take on new chapters and then ditch other chapters, and you kind of still learning, do you find?
Look, every day is a school day, you know, and the opportunity to just talk to people and to get involved in fora like this is amazing, because you see people who are doing all different things, and every time you get onto someone else's farm, you know, some of the stuff won't work for you because of what they have, but there's always stuff that you can do that works for you. Or so on the home farm, along with the orchard, we have a very large polytunnel. We grow probably through the summer about 75% of all our homegrown vegetables: the brassicas, the potatoes, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, the lettuce, all of those, just for home use. They definitely tie in with each other. I started with pigs. I didn't have any cattle, and then I wanted to get cattle, so I got Jersey Friesian crosses, you know, suck cows, and bred them up, and then we lost them all in 2010 to TB. So that kind of cleared us out, and the fallout of that was that under department regulation, you can't keep animals for 6 months. And so I got into sheep, and exactly the same way. I asked a few farmers around if they had any pet lambs, and so we started with pet lambs, and you know, all that underpinning of the vegetables and the orchards. And then the kids won 2 goats at the Boyle Summer Show. And so they came home on a Sunday, and on a Monday I rang the certification body, got a derogation to bring them into our herd, not knowing anything about goats. And one was a milking female she was a milking female with a baby. And so we tried goats and goat milk for a while, but that I found it was for me and for no one else in the house. And so we dried her off, and then they had to find a role on the farm. And so goats are browsers than grazers. And so they don't just eat grass, they'll eat trees and bark as well. And so they were put to work clearing some of the wilder areas on the land. Excuse me.
So you kind of had scrub or invasives, is it? Or?
A bit of both, actually. We have so we farm in North County Roscommon, and as you go further north, our ability to grow rushes increases. So we grow rushes particularly well. Also, the home farm had been unfarmed for about 5 years when we started, and I came to it with very little farming experience. So when we moved in 2006, in my head I was going to do what you do with a business project, you know, and it was going to be 90 days and I'd have it all licked in order. Well, I'm still working on that original plan, and it's evolving and growing. So definitely, definitely you have to be flexible.
So with all your kind of outlets, the sheep and you know, you mentioned the goats, but you have a beehives and stuff. Do you sell direct to customers, or
We do both.
Do you do with the product?
So when we do sausages, we do whole pig sausages. Okay, and they're certified organic, and they're 95% pork and 5% organic oats, and then by flavors. And those are direct sales. The particular challenge that our farm faces is continuity of supply, because we have an excellent product. Sorry, certainly patting himself on the back, but there's this great demand for quality food, and so a big complication for us is actually being able to supply what the demand is. Every sausage we produce, we could sell twice over, and the problem with that is when we have it, and when we don't, people ring up and say, "Can we get sausages?" And in that moment, they're a lost customer to you. And so that's a complication. So adding the sheep to that was quite useful, actually, because we could produce about 20 lambs a year, and that gave us the opportunity to sell 20 lamb boxes. We'd sell them as a processed lamb. I'd bring them to the slaughterhouse, and then from the demand from a customer, they could have it butchered however they wanted. So a family of 5 could get 5 thick chops or thin chops, or they could get more roasts or more mince or more diversity in their meat. And so that was the USP for that particular product. Was you can have what you want, so long as you take the whole animal.
Okay, interesting.
And and that was coming out between a 22 and 25 kilo box of meat, and we could sell that for about €220, which for a lamb is very good. For an animal that's kind of 8 months on the farm, that's excellent.
So did you find, just going on to that, like, you obviously had a very sympathetic butcher who didn't mind that you were kind of mixing and changing how the animal was cut up, but did you find much waste with the
not at all.
Not at all. Okay.
The few things that weren't always demanded were, for example, the shanks, or people would go like, "Yeah, can we get 6 lamb shanks in it?" I'm going like, "You can, but a lamb's only got 4 legs." And so all you can get out of that box is 4. And so people having to educate nearly the clients in terms of this is what actually comes out of it. And then we do so moving on from the lamb to the cattle, we're very fortunate to be close to Liam and Justina Gavin. They have an organization, honestly, they have an organic one. So we supply part of our product towards them. And then we would do half beef boxes ourselves, and that's more for family and friends. So we butchered ourselves, and then that's sold to a much smaller, because of continuity of supply, to a much smaller circle of customers.
So you have a customer base as opposed to kind of standing in a farmer's market every Saturday.
100%.
Selling
I have a WhatsApp group, and I say, "This is what we have available now. Anybody let me know, and let me know how you'd like it as well." And so depending on what's finished when, that's the way the demand gets done. So that's a completely flexible way.
And what do you do with your Dexters then?
Mostly those go direct to neighbors and friends.
Okay.
There's because they're finished, absolutely finished off grass.
Yeah.
Well, finished off rushes, but yeah, finished on the land.
Are they, so just going into the management of them, are they indoors 3 months of the year, or?
We have no housing.
Okay.
Everything is completely extensively outdoor grazed. So we're lower stocked. At any one time we have three cows and then 2 years worth of followers. So tiny amounts. And then if we come under pressure for grass, then we slaughter them a little bit smaller. So we can manage what we have available within the unit.
And then your honey is then, how many kind of pots do you produce a year, or?
This year was a good year.
Yeah, imagine.
So we probably produced, well, let's say I ordered 1,000 jars and there's none left. So all of those will be sold between now. So the honey is stored in big plastic, food containers, and we jar off a couple as we need. So on the alpaca farm, we have a guest house. We're fortunate to have a guest house, and so as a welcoming gift, we put a jar of honey in there, and invariably the guests take they buy then 2 or 3 jars.
Okay.
So
It creates a
So
market.
that's our yeah, it's a great way to market.
Mhm.
You know, it's just something nice to be able to say, you know, people can bring it away with them, and as a marketing gesture, they go like, well, we stayed on the guest house and this is honey off the farm, and
Mm.
they can go and look at the apiary. We tend not to recommend people go in it, but
Yeah,
they
fair
can
enough.
walk down and see it.
So such a diverse farm, some people might say it's quite labor intensive. Do you find it is? What do you think? Or...
So there are a couple of there are some things that are labor intensive. Certainly from when we're running with pigs can be very demanding on your time. You know, they want to be fed at least once a day, preferably twice a day. With the dexters and the sheep, they only need to be rotated. So that could be on a weekly basis. They can be shifted on from paddock to paddock. The farm is divided into 9. So we have a kind of, you know, a loose, they run as a flood. And so we're getting better utilization of the grass. And then we can close a pasture for up to 3 months. You know, now it's going to be, the rotation is going to be much shorter now over the winter. But in preparation for that, we've stocked down. So we'll have 4 sheep, and there's 7 cows there at the moment, and 2 of them are dexters, so they're actually earmarked to go. There's big demand at the moment for dexters because of the acre scheme, and so we'll run as little as we can over the winter.
And you run that when you say as a flood, so you're running it with the 40 hens, is it?
No, as a flock and a herd.
Yeah.
The sheep flock and the herd. No,
Oh, the sheep. Oh, sorry.
The chickens, sheep and so the chickens permanently live under the fruit trees, under the apple trees.
Okay, fair enough. So that's good.
Yeah.
That's another area we were going to come into. I know you tried agroforestry before for you, so, and this kind of feeds into the chickens, I suppose, being in the orchard. But how has agroforestry worked for you?
I've had some successes, and I've had some, I don't want to say failures, but I've had some not successes.
Lessons.
So over the years, we've done a number of different things. When we got the pigs, the original reason for getting the pigs actually was to try and improve the quality of the grassland. You know, when we moved onto the farm, some of the rushes were 5 and 6 foot tall. And so, you know, they hadn't been managed for years. And so the pigs were the first step in trying to knocking that down, and they do an amazing job. And what's interesting about pigs is they actually eat the roots of the rushes. So they eat those tubers, and so they snuffle them out. And so once you've reduced that burden enough, you can then turn it to, you don't get ever rid of the rushes because of the weed seed burden in the soil, but you reduce that pressure, and that gives other species opportunity to compete. Coming out of that, in some areas, we've had willow that is reseeded, so kind of native woodland recovery, you know, as a pioneer species. It's done that. We've always been big into different forms of hedge planting. So we've planted fruiting hedges, and we've planted black and white thorn hedges with standards in between. Those have all been fairly successful because those have mostly been done through environmental schemes. So there are quite specific requirements about protecting them. So fencing on both sides, and, you know, quite specific planting densities. But then also with the land that we have excellent soil. So knowing what soil you have has been important. So we have a silty clay loam, but we have a massive drainage problem. You know, we get so much water here that the bulk of our farming activity is actually about trying to direct the water away responsibly off the farm. And so in order to do that and to restart some of the life cycle, so, you know, the pumping systems of the water, we planted, for example, willows in corners of the pastures. And those have been extremely successful. You know, just fence off the corner and just plant slips of willow. You know, so goat willow is particularly good over here, nearly native to this part of North County Roscommon. And we've done that. In Glass, we were able to plant a grove of native trees. So we put 400 of those in. About 80% of those were actually successful. It's interesting when you look at the growth rate of the different trees, as they've more protected themselves. So as the outer trees have kind of provided shelter to the inner trees have been able to strive ahead, and so you get this kind of cone shape right across the whole grove, which has been really interesting. And we've planted a lot of standard trees. You know, I like to plant trees. If you want to save carbon, guys, plant trees. You know, so we planted a lot of standard trees around. Oak. We did for a long time, I used to actually harvest ash trees from around and bring them on the farm and plant them in. Some of those haven't really thrived, and I suspect that that's, it's a complication. Moving from the home farm down to the alpaca farm, there is a lot of native woodland there, and the predominant trees would be old established ash trees.
Mm.
And so we're planning, we're trying to figure out what the replacement trees are that we need to plant into those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Because of if all the research is to be believed, in the next 20 years, 95% of all native grown ash, wild ash, is going to be dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so 20 years isn't a very long time to replace that landscape with
Mm-hmm.
trees that can get to that size, because these are the real grandfathers of the tree structure.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just, so
Yeah, it's
a
kind of
lot
hard.
of agroforestry stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's heartbreaking for them. So just because you mentioned it, so tell me about the alpaca farming. How did you get into that, and what do you actually do with it?
I used to work as a commercial vegetable grower, and the garden is in Knockvicker, and I was walking down the bog one day, and I bumped into a man, and we were just chatting as you do, and he was telling me that he's from Switzerland, and he had just bought some alpacas.
Mm.
And, like, never heard of an alpaca. So this was in 2012, and it was like one of those, oh yeah, I must look that up one day. And I went home and I did some research, and anyway, 2 years later, we had got the opportunity to get some more land, and we started with a few alpacas. Of the two enterprises, that one has actually grown to be, I don't want to say more thriving, but certainly more vibrant. There's definitely got a much better cash flow through it because of how we diversified. So when I started that with Angela, the proviso was that we'd use it as a kind of therapy farm. We'd give some people opportunity to, they have great empathy, alpacas. And specifically in Germany and Holland, they actually use alpacas as therapy animals. Just like, equine therapy, well, there's alpaca therapy that goes with that. And specifically for people who have mental ill health.
Mm.
And so the intention was to actually see if we couldn't establish that, which was why the guest house was actually set up. We thought maybe we'll give people respite and let them be on the alpaca farm. That hasn't, I don't want to say it's not been successful, but the focus on the guest house, there's more demand for not people with needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've kind of let that business go where it goes. We get a lot of people from the different disability services coming to just spend time with the alpacas because we're fortunate to have good facilities.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually drive a van into the barn and unload a wheelchair and then drive the van out and close the doors and let the alpacas in. So people who wouldn't necessarily have access to animals
Mm-hmm.
are able to actually intimately, on a one-to-one basis, interact, or a one-to-many if the herd is around,
Mm-hmm.
actually interact with the animals. That kind of, so when I started, the therapy was to be a small focus of it, but actually we were going to set up a breeding herd specifically for wool, for their wool, so for fleece. And that's still my passion, is the textile side of actually growing their wool and actually producing product from that. And so the farm produces pillows and duvets from their fleece.
So you shear them, or whatever the equivalent is for an alpaca?
We breed them, and we do all of we breed them and we grow them and we shear them.
Okay.
And
And
then
you send that to the UK, is it? Or
we ship our fleece to the UK, to a factory in the UK. There's no one processing wool in that way, or fleece in this country doing that. And then we import the product back. Yes, Brexit was a real pain in the ass. Things that you have to pick up, like we've had to register the farm. I'm now a registered importer exporter, which was never it's never what I expected to have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an import export license. We register with the revenue as importers and exporters. We know the classifications of our wool when we send it, and when the product comes back, so they check to see, they verify that it's what we've shipped out. And there was a whole learning through COVID around that. And so we sell those directly off the farm. My advice to people is absolutely get alpacas, but don't think that they're going to make you a millionaire, because they are quite hard work. And actually, going back to that original problem with the meat about continuity of supply, you have to know what your market's going to be and decide and tailor your product to that. So our problem is we don't have enough alpacas, but we're kind of maxed out from a space perspective. So we can only produce between 40 and 60 pillows and duvets a year. And that's it.
Mhm.
And because we pride ourselves on being a high welfare farm, the producers have said, we'll sell you whatever you like, white labeled, so you can sell it as your own. And we're kind of in this compromised position of going like, well, actually, we'll only take what we know we've produced on our farm, because we can then sell that as a USP.
Mhm.
So we can say to people, you can come to our farm and you can meet these animals, and we can certainly verify that product from that animal is actually in the product that you've got. And we
is
can
there
stand over the welfare.
Okay, yeah. And is there known benefits or anything of, I don't know, are they kind of good for allergens or anything, kind of alpaca fleece
Well, there
pillows?
is. The alpaca fleece has hundreds of excellent characteristics.
Mhm.
The two key ones is it's a thermoregulator as opposed to an insulator. So actually it keeps you warm in winter and cool in summer. So that's actually what's quite sought after in South America and the Andes and that, because they have huge temperature fluctuations.
Mhm.
So their ponchos they'd wear all day and all night. So
Mhm.
at night they regulate. The fleece is quite good. It's a hollow fiber. And if there's too much airflow through the fleece, it kind of shrinks up a bit.
Okay.
And then if there's not enough airflow through it, it relaxes. And so it's an
Mhm.
excellent thermoregulator. So it doesn't get a tog because it doesn't insulate.
Mhm.
So it breathes with your body, so it wicks away moisture. So there's a lot of all the adventure companies and that, for adventure outdoor enthusiasts, have alpaca underwear and alpaca socks and alpaca vests because it wicks the moisture away.
Okay.
So that's one characteristic. And the second one is it is hypoallergenic.
Mhm. Okay.
So yeah,
The new Labradoodle.
yeah, pretty
Yeah.
much.
So
So
just because you brought it up before, I mean, we'll just briefly go into the economics and then we'll actually talk more ecologically. You were saying you will become a millionaire out of it, but do both your farms wash their own faces and provide reasonable income or?
So across the two farms, from a farm payment perspective, the farm gets just under 10,000 euro a year from the organic farming scheme and through for the participation in GLOS and then the basic payment and the ANC payments. So that probably covers the bulk of the costs of having the livestock. It doesn't really contribute to my time.
Mhm.
Okay, but we have 4 kids, and so we have helpers, and it's good for their own physical and mental health to be involved. So they're very involved in both businesses. Specifically around the alpacas, we've been able to bribe them to actually run it as their own business, so we don't have to fund pocket money. They fund their pocket money themselves.
Mhm.
And I think this has been great for them from nothing's for nothing.
Mhm.
So they've always had to give something to get something.
Mhm.
And so it's been excellent like that. The alpaca farm, there's quite a big investment, and that's taken a long time to come back. But we're in a situation now where the product is quite profitable,
Mhm.
but it's taken 6 years to get to that point.
Like
The
you say,
organic
it's got
farm,
its unique kind of selling points as well.
it
I mean, I
does.
don't know how
And
many packer farms are in Ireland, but I can't imagine there's too many.
well, I can tell you all those details if you're bored. So yeah, there's about 150 registered alpaca farms in the country,
Okay.
members of the Alpaca Association. Well, anyway, enough about that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the goal is that the farms don't cost anything. The complication is, I do a lot of off-farm work, mostly because my passion is in a lot of places. So I love to talk about farming and organic farming specifically. And so coming out of that, I've become an organic advisor. So I do farm advice to farmers. A lot of my clients are older farmers who are perhaps not technology literate. And the way a whole society has moved is you have to be technology enabled to do stuff. So they just don't have any way to actually complete things like submissions to the department or anything like that, and are never going to be able to pick up that skill and don't want to.
Mhm.
And so I do that kind of support for them. But that keeps me on the ground on farms. So I know it's a job and it pays, but it's actually not. It's hardly work, if that makes.
Yeah, you enjoy doing it. So
I love doing it, and there's the whole social aspect to that. We're definitely seeing social and rural isolation kicking in. A lot of these farmers, they're older farmers. Their families are not as engaged as they could be. That's a real complication. So we have to support those people.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting that they obviously are making the move into organics, or they have already made the move. Is it that you're the advisor,
It's
or
actually
you're?
it's a combination of both.
Mm,
You know, when people think about going to become organic farmers, there's quite a mindset change, and it's often very difficult for more mature farmers to actually get their head around actually no more fertilizer.
mm,
You know, they would always said, well, we always spread 2 bags, so we're going to spread 2 bags next year, whether they know they need it or don't, and they don't. And I think, this last year has been a real eye-opener for a lot of farmers, conventional and organic,
mm.
where they've seen actually we can grow enough grass without specifically adding fertility, or adding fertility out of a bag.
Mhm. Absolutely. And have you seen a massive increase in organic numbers? I mean, obviously, this is a new scheme, so
Well, the new scheme has really shaken the tree, and there's, we had low-hanging fruit before, and now
yeah.
we're shaking the tree, and there's a lot fallen out.
Okay.
The European target for organic farming is 30% by 2020, 25% by 2030, which is 7 years away.
Mm.
They may achieve that target in Europe. In Ireland, we know for a fact that we couldn't achieve that target, and so we've actually taken a more conservative target and said we'll go for 7.5%, which is still a 350% increase from where we are now. So we have.
Okay. Right. So what's
So
the barrier to change versus the rest of Europe?
look, there's a lot of structural challenges. I
Okay.
think without pointing fingers, the state training organization Chagas have never really been
Equipped.
completely committed to actually making those changes. Their focus has been on the dairy sector
Mm.
and on optimizing beef numbers, and they've been very successful at that. And I think they've done a great job in that area. If we'd been able to get them to engage on the organic side to bring them to that point, we could have had as much success. There is that. There's a lot of argument and counter argument about the value of inputs and the importance of inputs to the soil. And I think we're starting to see, sort of, not only nationally but internationally, people are recognizing that the soil is important and soil microbial life is important. And so we've recognized that some of the farming practices we may have pushed in the past haven't been as good for those environments as they could have been.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, there is quite a compelling, we're under a lot of pressure. Agri-environment or organic farming is considered agri-environmental. And so those schemes all address some of the pressure points that we're facing humanity today, climate change, water quality, biodiversity, and organic farming by its nature addresses the bulk of those. So there's a lot of interest.
I can imagine there's a lot of interest. I'm just a bit saddened to hear where our target is only 7% for 2030.
7.5% by 2030.
7.5%, yeah.
Which is, it's woeful, but going back to the structural thing, number one, Ireland has always painted itself as a green, sustainable land. And so even things like the big marketing company, Bord Beer, that is responsible for the development and promotion of Irish product internationally, they've been telling them that we have this amazing product. They've been very loose with the truth, as it were, about green and organic and what the difference between the two is. And so we now have someone from Bord Beer full-time working to promote Irish organic, which is great. That's huge progress. Additionally, within the Department of Agriculture, for example, the organic unit was never a full unit. It was always kind of a subsection, and it's now been recognized as a full unit within the department. So even they're internally under pressure to ramp up the importance of organic farming because of the environmental benefits that it brings. And then on top of that, there's a chicken and egg thing with processing. So from a dairy perspective, we don't have enough organic dairy producers, to actually justify one of the big processors making the switch. And so they're not incentivized to do that because, it's a costly investment business from their perspective. So we recognize there are lots of blockers to massive take up and progression. And then.
And does marketing show that, consumer interest is increased in this area?
Bord Beer have done some research recently, and 1 in 2 Irish consumers are prepared to pay up to 10% more for organic product. So it's not that the consumer isn't there. It's that we don't have sufficient supply, and sufficient supply is a complicated one because Ireland is very good at growing grass. We're not particularly good at growing tomatoes, and so we could be food sovereign from an organic perspective, from a beef perspective, almost from a lamb perspective, not from a dairy perspective, absolutely not from a tillage perspective, and in absolutely no way from a horticulture perspective. And so there are structural challenges all the way through that we need to understand and address. And we recognize that, it's a development, it's a learning process. And organic farming is only one strand. I don't want to put all my eggs in the, we have to be environmentally responsible, both organic farmers and conventional farmers.
Absolutely. I mean, farming for nature, we're not exclusive to organic at all.
Exactly.
We're about farming for nature. I mean, so
exactly.
There's a lot of organic farmers that are also very intensive and don't have much nature. So, no, I totally understand that. So if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to write them in the chat box, and then we'll kind of deal with them as they come along. Just a quick question. The other question I have there, just because you brought it up earlier, is land capacity. You were kind of saying the demand is there for alpaca, but you realized your pinch point, I suppose, of how important, or how, if you're advising, because you are a advisor as well, so I'm going to forget you to put your advisor hat on as well as your farmer hat on. How important is it for every farmer to realize what their land capacity is, in both ecologically and then obviously economically, because they obviously vary, they're very varied and can often be at the other end of the tipping balance. But to understand the land capacity is very important. How have you understood yours, and where do you think your tipping point, where did you realize your tipping point was?
So it's critical for every farmer to understand what their land can carry. Okay, and I appreciate that there's a lot of pressures on farmers in terms of their financial responsibility to their family and the requirements for their farms to produce certain levels of income, because this is their secondary or tertiary income stream. But the more you look at the land, you have to farm within what the land can carry. And even our understanding of what the land can carry is progressing and changing. And when you speak to certain farmers that have made the switch to alternate farming practices, I'll be generous and not say to organic specifically, farmers are starting to see the soil coming back and their ability to grow grass increasing. And it's coming back for two reasons. Number one, because they're not trying to get so much out of the soil has a chance to look after itself. And because it can look after itself, it's a virtuous cycle. It actually empowers itself to grow more. So as the microbial life improves, the access to nutrients is improved, and therefore the plants are able to access those nutrients and actually grow better plants. Because they're growing better plants, because the stocking densities are down, the root systems of the plants are growing deeper, and so they're actually mining better nutrients. So now you're getting better root systems that are mining more nutrients, and so you're getting better plant growth again. So you're seeing animals finishing on slightly less or getting better quality forage. So it's to educate people to just call out some of the things that we probably know, but in the hustle bustle of life we've forgotten about. I was on a farm a couple of weeks ago, and the farmer was telling me that his farm was known as a 6-cow farm. And he runs 20 cows and 18 followers and 18 second years. And he said his family would have known that farm wasn't capable of that. And so it's, we've lost that. Consumerism and society in which we live has driven our attention off the farm and off the land. And to try and bring some of those back. Knowing what my farm can carry, how we learned what we could carry, it boils down to animal health. And if you pay attention to your livestock, which is really critical, building relationship with your animals and respecting them and having a relationship with them allows them allows you to manage them, but it also gives you opportunity to understand their welfare and look and see how that progresses for them. And so you can tell by their condition whether there's enough forage or not. And when there isn't enough forage, you end up having to go off farm and buy expensive inputs. And I use expensive loosely. And so it's to figure out, what can I farm without having to spend any money on inputs? And if you can get to that equation, then that's really what your land can carry. And that's driven a little bit by the size of the farm that you have, the number of livestock you've done, how you farmed the land in the past. So we found some of our pastures have become much more productive because we're less intensive on them. Those farms, those areas where we've planted hedges, we found the boundaries have become more biodiverse, and the animals spend more time there because they've got shelter. And then the diversity that's there means that when it's drier, not a big problem on our farm, but when it's drier, then those plants that have deeper rooting systems actually are more sustainable, and they have better capacity to survive. It's very difficult to say extreme conditions in Ireland, but when the conditions are more challenging to them, they're better equipped to deal with those conditions. So from the alpaca farm perspective, it's if we bought in feed, we could stack 12 animals an acre. That would be no welfare because they'd be quite intensely farmed. So we try to extensively farm that, but we endeavor not to have to spend money on alpaca feed because that's a cost. And alpaca feed is not organic, but it costs nearly €700 a ton. And when you're feeding 50 animals and you're suddenly buying, a ton every 6 weeks, that becomes a big cost.
I hear a lot from our farmers who may have been kind of more
Excuse me.
conventional or intensive, and then have kind of diverted, gone down a different route towards kind of more ecological farming. Very often say their yields come down a lot, but their profits, the profits margins, so in many cases go up because obviously their inputs have come down a lot. Andrew, I just have a few questions here. Well, Dan McCarthy has said, it's great, it's a breath of fresh air, lovely to hear someone talk about all the practical experience and have theory also. Lucky to be able to work outside of the farm also, as it is difficult to make a living from farming alone. I want you to be the agriculture Minister for Agriculture. There you go.
Thank you, Dan. I'm not sure the
confidence.
Minister for Agriculture, actually. It's a great point. I'm not sure, unfortunately, he's the influencer that we think. He's a figurehead. It's the people below that, the senior civil servants, are the people that we actually need to engage with, the people that actually set policy.
Very much so.
We need to start. They do. They need to change a lot, and we need to influence that change from the bottom up.
So David Cotter has asked, I wonder if Andrew could give his thoughts on the lack of organic payments given to land under agroforestry that is organically managed. It's counterproductive for those who are interested in agroforestry. Thank you for all your training last year. Thank you, David.
Yeah, it is interesting. We have some structural issues in the forestry sector. So probably the blatant one is, once land gets classified as forestry, it's classified as forestry for good. You can't unforestry it. So once it moves from agricultural land to forestry land, once that change has been made, there's no way to change it back. Okay, and once forestry land is, once you've exhausted your forestry payment, you can't accrue any more payments on that. So this is recognized by the Irish Agroforestry Forum, by the Department of Agriculture, by the Forest. Everyone knows that this is there, but no one has been able to come up with an acceptable solution to address that yet. Even the new scheme that Pippa just announced, it's amazing, but it compromises all your other payments. So once you go down that agroforestry route, it's not really agroforestry, it's forestry with animals, if that makes sense. And so there are quite significant structural challenges in that sector that we haven't been able to address yet. But talking about the minister, I've met with Charlie on a number of occasions, and we've spoken about those, and they're aware of those. Just the internal machinations to make those changes to regulation are quite slow.
It's a big steamship to move.
Yeah, it is. It's huge change. And remember, on top of that, we have an amazing climate for growing trees. If you think the life cycle of the tree cycle in Ireland for a spruce tree is 30 years. That exact same tree grown in Germany is on a 90-year cycle. And so, there is international big business that invests in that. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. It creates opportunities. We grow good trees. We do utilize that. But, maybe we need to address some of the challenges there in terms of forcing of suggesting that there's more diversity planted into those mixes. So we move away from monoculture, because that addresses then some of our other European targets of biodiversity.
Yeah. Siggy Morrissey has said a really enjoyable and informative session. Also a smallholder and alpaca farmer here, and would love to hear more about options to grow this business. Any ideas around that?
Well, Ziggy, if I look at our alpaca farm, we have 5 revenue streams out of the alpacas. Okay, number one is the guest house. Okay, because that's on the alpaca farm, and so when people get to stay in the guest house, they get to visit the alpacas, and the alpacas are around the farm, so they get that. Number two is around the animals themselves, and there are kind of 3 revenue streams from an alpaca. We breed them for their fleece, so the females are very valuable because they can bring us more baby alpacas, and we can sell those. We get the wool from them, so that's very useful because that actually produces our primary sellable product. And then we actually offer interaction with them, and there's 2 kinds of interaction that you can do with an alpaca. There is farm visits, and we use that great as a platform to educate. So we bring people on the farm and we talk about rotations and land management, socialization of animals and animal welfare, and get people to actually interact on a personal basis in a herd of animals, which is, some people find that quite intimidating. And then we also offer alpaca trekking. So that means once your animals are well socialized and they've been halter trained, you can get people to pay you to bring your animals for a walk, which is, it's a nice way of looking at it. And then, because of that, we can do when we host some of our visitors from less fortunate communities or people who haven't been blessed with the same physical attributes as us, it allows us to do that at no cost or low cost to them. So that just gives them an opportunity where, as a society, we probably have some greater social responsibility that we've perhaps not been as good as we could have been. Mm-hmm. So looking at all those options, and then, we have the apiary. So that actually sells a lot of our honey we sell it as alpaca honey. I know you have to go through the whole explanation. No, we don't milk the alpacas. The alpacas come from there's kind of that. I did 2 years ago, I ran a small flock of chickens in a mobile ark on the alpaca farm, and I was selling alpaca eggs. That was interesting for fun.
I'd say great conversation, people like.
Great conversation, alpaca eggs, and then
Does this farmer know?
He does, yeah. Does he really?
Okay.
And then we've done some education with for example, the Sligo College of Further Education. They bring their level 5 and level 6 students down because alpacas would be unique. So we have a great opportunity for them to actually interact with a livestock unit that they wouldn't have had any experience with. They can go to dairy farms, and they go to sheep farms, and they go to beef farms, and that's what they mostly see. Mm-hmm. And so they get to go and see a form of diversification that they may not have come across or considered. And we do. Alpacas are easily kept, but they require a lot of maintenance, if that makes sense. They have to be shorn. They're susceptible to all Irish disease because they're not native to here. They can get rickets. They suffer from vitamin D deficiency. So, there's a lot of welfare. They need to be shorn every year. Some of them need dentistry. So we're alpaca dentists. They need their toenails clipping every year. So we do alpaca pedicures. And, there's lots of things like that. So if you can spend time socializing your animals, then actually they can be a great revenue stream. Mm-hmm. The counter to that is it takes time. And when we first opened the farm, we were open 9 to 5, 7 days a week. And you learn very quickly that actually you don't have that time. Certainly I don't have that time to be able to be available all of that time. And so we've changed our model. We just do everything by appointment. Mm-hmm. If you want to come, we'll host you, but you must ring up and make an appointment. And
is that a post-COVID or a wake-up call, or is that a pre-COVID?
Actually, don't tell anyone, but through COVID, when COVID hit, people were still ringing up saying, can we come to the farm? And Andrew and I discussed it and looked at our, what we felt was important was that people still needed to live a life, even though there were quite rigid restrictions in place. And so we said to people, if you feel you can get safely to the farm, then we will host you in small groups, no more than 2 families. It's always going to be outdoors. We had a little COVID talk about not exchanging body fluid and keeping a distance, and then we washed hands. And so we kind of worked that into the system. And actually that worked really well for us. And so that's actually how it works now. So I don't have to be there all the time. I do my alpaca farming after I've dropped Maliki to the school bus in the morning. I spend an hour feeding the alpacas and mucking around on the farm doing that. And then on the weekends we do, the fun stuff, planting the trees, the bird boxes and the bat boxes and the bee hotels and all of that maintenance. When you have a woodland farm and the alpaca farm is, all the fields are surrounded by native woodland or planted woodland, not very densely. Those trees all need care and maintenance. So they lose a lot of branches. And so to keep underneath clear in that, there's a lot of farming stuff. And then because we're on the shores of Lough Key, we're overrun with deer, both on the organic farm and the alpaca farm. And they do a lot of damage to fences,
It's ongoing.
It's an ongoing fight with them to keep them out the orchard. They love my apple trees.
I can imagine.
It's all just fun.
So Ed Coyle has asked, he wrote it directly to me, for organics, do you find that the mixed farm enterprises and lower stocking rates help with the health of animals and the lower use of doses and medicines?
Well, I can address that. I can answer that. Absolutely. The lowering stocking density means I never have to spend any money on fertility. Okay. So when we started, I invested a bit in liming to try and change my soil pH, but I'm actually now using the soil microbial life to address that. So now feeding the microbes in the soil is helping me change my pH. And so there is that. I have no dosing cost whatsoever. My sheep never see a vet ever. They only know me and the family. And my cattle only see the vet once a year when they do their herd test. So they don't know what a vet looks like either. I haven't had to dose any of those cattle we went back into cattle in 16. So in 7 years now, they've had nothing. Now there's part of that is selective breeding. Part of that is the fact that they're Dexters, and so they're a native Irish breed. They don't have any housing, so they're never in a confined enough space to actually catch anything from each other. And because we've always tried to operate a closed herd, so we've only ever bought in a bull that we put through a quarantine process. They don't get exposure to other animals from neighbors or anything like that, or from imparts. So I think my own herd health is quite good. When we started with alpacas, we had a lot of I spent a lot of money dosing them and keeping them safe, and I lost animals when I brought them to the vet. I brought them to the vet lab. The story was, well, it's this disease. I'm going like, but I'm treating for that disease, and as it transpired, the particular brand of dosage that I was using didn't cover the strain of disease that I had on the farm. And so it's learning that, and actually subsequently I've stopped treating for that because I think our animals have developed a natural resistance to that. They've developed their own immunity. And because we care so much about their own health, if you're healthy, you have an ability to resist disease. And so that lower stocking density has definitely made a difference.
Okay. Karen Mahon has said, what's the market for alpaca wool in Ireland? Sorry if it was already dealt with. Karen, Andrew actually brings his fleece back to Ireland and sells it, makes it into pillows and duvets, so sells it directly to customers on his farm. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Andrew?
Well, actually, until very recently, there was no one actually processing alpaca fleece in Ireland apart from at a tiny scale, sort of hand spinners in the small scale market. Just at the start of COVID, a young lady started a mill up in Cavan. She called herself Olin Mills, and she actually was importing alpaca fleece from South America because she couldn't source it locally. She's still not sourcing it locally because the alpaca, I don't want to make this an alpaca education lesson, but so with alpaca wool, you can't mix fleece from 2 animals unless they happen to have the same identical fleece characteristics. And there are 5 kind of characteristics that need to be the same for you to mix them. So color, crimp, density, so how fine the micron is, staple length, okay, and then luster, the feel, actually the handle of the fleece. So you could have 2 animals with class 1 fleece, but actually one of the characteristics may not match, and therefore you couldn't spin them into the same yarn.
Mhm.
And so until we get to a critical mass, much bigger than we have now, there's only about 3,000 animals in Ireland. There isn't anyone who's prepared to invest in that. So anyway, there's a mini mill in Cavan. And so this year, for the first time, we took 10 kilograms of our best fleece from individual animals, and we sent that off to see what we'll get back. And we were told we'd get it back in the middle of November, which actually is about a week ago. So I just haven't made the call to find out
How's she getting
where
on?
it is, but I suspect, how she's getting on, but I suspect that I'll have some fleece back there.
Great.
So yeah, you do need to, that's a very important question actually, just about the whole farm, is whatever farming system you're doing, the most important thing is to understand where the market for your product is and to know what you want that market to be. So, if you're going to be a producer of livestock, you can produce weanling cows, okay? Or you can produce sucklers, or you can produce stores, or you can produce forward stores, or you can actually or you can be a finisher, or you can do calf to beef, or any kind of combination of those things. And each of those decisions that you make about that product will drive some of the decisions on your farming system. So where you source your replacements, how much feed you're going to be prepared to look after them, what stocking density you can have, so understanding where your market is and what your product is kind of a critical question for every farmer all the time,
Mm-hmm.
because that will actually govern a lot of the decisions that you have to make about your farming system.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to make profit, you have to reduce your input costs, and your input costs are everything from the inputs that you spend money on, so that's spending money to other suppliers, and your time commitments, because the labor, people don't, we very easy give our time at no cost.
Mm-hmm.
And now when we started the alpaca farm, I didn't have it open to anybody. It was just for their wool, and it was my own private Idaho. And then I had a little, I don't want to say a tete-a-tete, but we had Angela and I had a stern conversation about what it was costing and how it wasn't specifically paying for itself yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that drove us to diversify and to offer the farm walks and the alpaca trekking. But it was a mindset change for me to go, okay, how can I respectfully exploit these animals without negatively impacting on their welfare?
Mm-hmm.
And then, we do, because we're a big station, a breeding station, we get a lot of phone calls from people saying, I want to start, and how much can I do? And there is a lot of focus on the financial side of it. And then people are going like, well, how many times can I walk an alpaca in a day? And we're like, well, how many times can it safely do that? So we have 12 animals, and if we do 2 walks a day with 12 animals, that's what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't really ask them to walk for 6 hours a day. They have their own ethological requirements. They need to eat and graze for 8 hours. They need to play for 8 hours and chew the cud, and they need to sleep for 8 hours. And you're not walking them in their sleeping time. So then you're walking them in their grazing time or their chewing the cud time, which are both essential for their nutrition and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to take away from that time, then you're going to negatively impact their welfare. So it's to understand all of those things. But following the market is essential. My problem with sausages is I can't produce enough. And so when I go to customers, they go like, all snapped up, and then we want some and I don't have it. And so then they head off to Super Value or to a competitor. And so understanding what your capacity is, and also having a relationship with customers. When we started with pigs, it was all about the story. So, it was just at the advent of social media. And so everything was about the story. The kids were involved in feeding, and there's lovely photographs of the kids carrying buckets and standing up to their knees in mud in with the pigs, and, come and see the animals that you're going to eat and the welfare that goes around that. So telling your story is really important. And that's part of what this fantastic podcast does, is it puts the story out there.
Talking which, Pork Keol has written to me saying, can anyone join your WhatsApp group for purchasing organic products, or is it closed?
We're kind of closed at the moment because of supply, but there are suppliers out there. I'll give someone like Clive, the Rare Ruminaire. He often has capacity because he's a much bigger scale farm.
Yeah.
So he has capacity. I know organizations like Honestly Farm, Drumandilra, they have capacity. I know if you're looking for organic vegetables, and people like Beach Lawn Organic Farm, they have capacity. They do box schemes and that.
Mm-hmm. So just one last question, and then we'll kind of round up then soon after. Kevin Hanrahan has asked, how do you manage outwintering the cattle regards poaching of the land, especially I suppose if you've got such wet land as well, Andrew?
So we have number one, we selected a small animal. So I have miniature Dexters essentially. They're small, they're light on the ground. Because I'm lowly stocked, the impact their impact on the ground is low. I also am very fortunate that one of my fields is actually a 2-hectare field on the side of a hill, and so I graze that very little in the summer. They just get one kind of short 2-week grazing in the middle of summer just to kind of stimulate the grass growth, and then they spend most of the winter out there. And then come March, when we're just starting to see some dryness in the air, we start bringing them onto the other pasture to try and bring it on. Poaching is a complication. Okay. But we work on drainage. There's always areas where you can try and restrict the animals with the use of electric fence to minimize that impact.
Very good. And so I do supplement feed, because I think very often farmers, what they say is they kind of move their supplement feeding around as well, so that cattle aren't all in the one place.
So for cattle, we don't supplement feed at all. They're grass only. Saying that, I have to confess, I do buy a bag of organic nuts probably once every 8 weeks, and that's mostly to keep the animals tame. So I take a 1 kilogram an old peanut butter plastic container, and I fill that up and I put it in a bucket, and when I shake that, it sounds like a rattle. And I can call my cows from anywhere. When I put those nuts in and shake the bucket, they'll all come over to me. And so that means they'll go wherever I want them. They'll do what they're asked,
the sugar
which is
candy.
yeah. That's pretty much from the alpaca perspective, because of their origin. The grass in Ireland is too green for them, and so there's too much nitrogen in it. So actually, we have to supplement feed them with hay all year round. Because when you're, now we're going into the science of feeding animals. When you feed cows, you're feeding them grass, but actually you're not feeding the cow. You're feeding the microbes that live in the stomach of the cow. As the initial digestion, and then the second batch of microbes in their second stomach that actually produces the carbohydrates that the animals live on. So when you're eating beef and dairy, you're actually eating bacteria poo. I mean, it's very crude, but that's loosely how that system works. And that's what a ruminant does. It ruminates the cud, and then those bacteria. So the same bacteria in the animal, the bacteria in the soil, the bacteria in our gut health, all of those things we're starting to now appreciate from a scientific perspective are completely interrelated and important.
Absolutely. And that's why when you get really good meat, you can taste it.
You can taste the difference.
You can taste the difference. It has a lot of taste, and it's interesting. So just finishing up, I suppose if you were to pick one memory of your journey on these farms, one memory that stands out for you in terms of nature, is there anything that stands out for you that you kind of go, okay, so we're doing a good job for nature here?
I think a time I always remember is about 4 years ago. We had a terribly frosty winter. And I remember going outside, and all down the hill pasture where the cattle were, all the furze was frozen, and there were icicles on each of them. And the bushes weren't green anymore, they were white. And just in the moment the sun was up, and the spider webs were all kind of encased in gold. And the gold and the silver of the furze together was just, it's just one of those, you can't recreate the picture. But it was a frosty morning, the sky was blue, the sun was up. It was early enough that there was still silence. There was no cars around, and that was a really special time. But we're blessed, and just by location, I think for everybody, all of your farms have something special, and it's your job to seek those out and find them, and then to support those. On the alpaca farm, we have red squirrel, we have jays, we now have endemic woodpecker, which is unusual in the west of Ireland. We have it butts onto the lake, so we see swans and we see a lot of waders. We have ravens in the bog. We're just, from that perspective, it's beautiful. And then also, that's the animal side, but to get in touch with the other stuff, walk in the field and find the clovers and the trefoils that you have and the scabious, and learn to know the plants that are there, because they're as beautiful and amazing.
Mhm.
And plant more trees, people. Trees are really good for, and then hug them. You know, just
Mhm.
it's a blessing to be able to do those things.
Absolutely, enjoy what you've got. Listen, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. It's lovely to hear your take on it all and your story. It's a very different and interesting story, so thanks for that. And I'm delighted you took a left turn with your business degree and took up the farming. If anyone, hopefully we'll be doing a farm walk, hopefully in the summer, perhaps with Andrew. So feel free to join our newsletter, find out about different events that we'll be having over the next kind of few months, and hopefully Andrew will be doing one for us. If you have any questions for any of our farmers, do write onto our online forum that we have through our website. It's a safe space if you want to ask any questions, practical questions about farming for nature on your land and actions that you can take. Our next Q&A is in 2 Tuesdays' time with Angus O'Costawal from County Galway, and we'll be talking about how he runs a productive farm on 1 acre, a horticultural farm alongside nature. But Andrew, thank you so much again. And for anyone that missed part of this, it will be up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. And if you know of anyone that'd be interested, they can also find it there. So until next time, thanks very much to everyone for joining us. And thank you, Andrew, and best of luck. And we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Bridget, and good luck all of you.
Thank you.